Chair. Or a chair.
Did you understand that?
Well, I
Change in June.
wanted to stop my video better that way. Oh, we got the hour anyway.
How many people do we have coming tonight?
I told her that I would not be
Yeah, is
available in person or probably on the phone.
Oh, I meant from
The second half of January, that was, I
5.
told Rick that a long time ago, and I don't think that's why she asked that question, but maybe there was someone else who couldn't be available. Okay.
I thought she said change it through the 16th.
She said that this says that it's scheduled for the 23rd. She said change it to
Hey,
the
how you doing?
16th, and I told her I would not be.
Yeah.
Hey, Gordon.
I didn't get any additional follow-up questions on that,
I won't.
on that
I'm
email that
leaving,
was sent
yeah, I'm
earlier.
leaving the night of
And
the
I didn't really get a
15th.
question
I won't
on
be back
that. He
early
just said,
until
this is the summary of what I read. And I was like, well, if you read the staff report, it actually says very much the same thing. So yes,
And Japan.
I didn't go there. He's
Cold air
perfect.
blows from Siberia across the warm sea of Japan, hits the mountains, and creates a massive winter. So they, in Japan, Utah says the greatest snow on earth. Here, Japan has drier, typically drier snow in most winters because it's colder and the mountains are tall. It's just a bigger dynamic than here, but it's the same idea.
So this northern Japan?
We don't have enough to have a quorum just yet. That's why I was asking Marta who all's expected tonight.
That's true.
Jason will be here.
Good.
At least I would expect him to be here.
After sending an email, right?
He called me, told me he was gonna be here.
The commissioner won't work on that.
Okay, perfect.
Is Rick or Charlie gonna be here? Oh, there's Rick.
The lovely and talented.
What's that?
I said the lovely and talented.
Oh, yes. How are you guys? Season.
We're getting
Last-
well fed, thank you. Good choice.
What's that?
We're getting well fed here.
That's good. That's good. Last meeting of the year, so. Sneaks upon us way too quick.
There he is.
You can get out. You can just get out.
Exactly.
Yeah, just get out.
I got some pizza on my way out.
No.
Pizzas for closers only.
For those of you who haven't heard, Steve has accepted a position with Ogden City and is leaving us the end of this year. So we wish him all the best. But he will be missed.
He's gonna do great things.
Yes, he will.
Hey, Rick, did they make any changes to the development agreement, or they just passed it as it was written?
No, they made a few changes to that. The irrigation ditch behind there, they talked about either piping it or doing something with that, and we indicated he's got to do that anyway with the subdivision. So, but this generally covers us with that. They talked about parking for the hotel, and
Have they changed something in the agreement already with respect to that?
yes, yeah, they added some language, and really our ordinance covers that anyway, as far, but they just want to make sure there's adequate parking for the hotel. And that they build a structure that the design of it is compatible, and our architecture guidelines already deal with that, so that's already covered there. There was one other thing they added to that. Oh, no, that was already in there. They added something about incorporation if that has happened, but
To exclude
That's-
themselves, yeah.
that
was protect themselves.
but state statutes will govern that, so that's kind of a new issue. Yeah, and they ended up approving, I think you guys are all aware, they approved the street regulating plan, the previous meeting. In that meeting, they approved the rezone, but conditioned it upon the development agreement getting approved. And that was approved 2 weeks later today.
Did they
And it was a
change the
3-on-1.
building heights?
They did not. No, they stayed the same, so that will govern.
50, I thought they went to 50 feet, that's what I
Yeah,
read.
that's what they did.
Yeah, that's what they did. They went from,
Where'd that come from?
they went from the standards that were in there to the standards that are in the development agreement. So that's what will.
Yeah, so we worked on those like 2 months ago, and
Yeah.
then we just threw them all out.
Well, I wouldn't say we threw them all out, but because they looked at step back requirements, which are in
But
there
it's
right
only
now.
based on the highway,
Right.
where ours was based on all the roads.
Yeah, yeah. And so they did change some things.
That's a big deal.
And that happens with development agreements.
It happens,
Things
and
happen.
it's a big, in my opinion,
Yeah.
a big deal. I think it's a shame. I think it flies in the face of the general plan of the community. I've seen this happen before in places that I've lived like this. And it's one of those avoidable consequences of growth. Everybody says smart growth, smart. Well, it's not smart. Stick a building up so high when everything else is so flat. And there's no need for it unless you're just trying to enrich somebody. Because they can accomplish whatever they want to without being 50 feet tall.
And that's your opinion.
Yes,
The commissioner
for sure.
had a different opinion.
Yep.
And I respect both of them. And we just have to kind of go with that.
It does kind of hurt though, because we just spent all that time working on it, and we just passed it, and they agreed, and we all agreed. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of crazy.
It happens. I mean, there's many times where we spend tons of time in our report and you guys change the decision and I told my staff, just brush it off and go on to the next project. You know, it's kind of, it's hard, but you just kind of have to roll with it. And that's kind of the planning profession, unfortunately, the legislative body trumps everything. And you spend all this time and it's a challenge. I totally get it.
Is it correct? The way I understood it is that, so now, like, it's only that 300 foot from the road is short, but not, like, so if I'm, because our ordinance was anything on the road was 35 feet and then 40 on the step back.
Yeah.
And then the new one, as it applies, will now be just past 300 feet. It's up to, it's really anything. Right? It passed 300, every building could be 550 feet.
No, there's certain ones, it's just only with more the hotel.
Because it doesn't say that in
Yeah.
the development agreement though.
Let's get Charlie.
Because I asked him and he said, when I emailed him, he said that only that the development agreement now is the rule.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, that
It is.
would negate, so basically all the street fronts could be front at 300 feet past could be 50 feet.
For some reason, I'm thinking that it was just applying to the hotel, but I'd have to go back and look at it.
I looked for it because I was curious. It does say that no hotel can be built closer than 300 feet, but the building heights specifically say past 300 feet, it can be 50
Yeah,
feet.
let's chat with him to make sure.
Because that was my concern is I'm like, okay, like, because my question in my email said like, okay, so are we trading 25 feet at the highway for overlooking 35 feet at every other road?
Yeah,
For 50.
and the
That
way
was my
that,
concern.
the way the street regulating plan lays out and what everybody's been saying is the new street that goes through there is the main street now of Eden Main Street in effect, right? That's what they've been touting. So why isn't that then where the measurement starts? If that's
Similar to what they did in Old Town Eden, right? They did the similar thing in Old Town.
We tried to.
It got done, didn't it?
Well,
It steps back.
Well,
Yeah,
it's supposed to apply.
On the way in here, I
But
stopped.
now they just said a new tenant's.
Because they're a different development agreement.
Yeah.
Well, there's no development.
There's also a comment in there about surrounding development being able to do by the same height in that development, which is strange.
I haven't read, I opened it up, but I didn't read it, so.
On the way in here, I stopped at the computer and took a picture of what it says, and it says maximum building height, and this is for all the form-based village, 40 feet. Except
That's
35, correct, except 35 feet and no more than 2 stories for any part of any building within 30 feet of a public street right of way.
Is it 50 feet or 3 stories or?
Doesn't sound, no,
Let's
nowhere in here
try this
is,
before we get worked up about this.
no one, where in here is
Would
50
be my
feet.
recommendation. And then, couple other things I can bring it up when we get to planning director's comments, so if we have time at the end of this. I wanna.
That clock is not right, by the way.
Yeah, it's 4:40.
Yeah.
So we got 20 minutes.
Okay, all right. Let's, is Janet on there? Commissioner Wampler?
Mhm.
Okay, cool, awesome. Well, we can get started, and then when Charlie comes, we have time, we can chat about some of those.
I don't think Charlie's planning on coming, is he?
He was gonna pop in on Zoom. Yeah, so when he gets here, we'll chat about that, and then, Jeff, you had some questions to an email that I'll address in the in the director's comments. And then we'll talk about the meeting. 16 most things, so. Felix, is yours the first one?
Yes, yes. So yeah, I mean, pretty basic, request from a landowner up there, Mr. Jason Cohn. He would like to, create a conference / education center, which that's how it's stated in the code. And, yeah, staff looked it over and felt like that's an appropriate request, based on the definition and what he's proposing to use this property for. And its relation to the, existing, wildlife areas. And, just looking, yeah, part of our review also looked at impacts and things. And did you guys have any questions about the request
Is there,
or about?
I know there are other ways to get lodging, to run a lodging business on your property. Is there some other way for this folks to do it, given what their setup is? Like breakfast, or like somebody just did up towards Old Snow Basin Road recently, without going through the gymnastics of saying you're doing a whatever that they're probably not, I mean, they're not really doing that. Come on. Anybody can look up at the sky from anywhere in the valley. I can look out at any given time and see all sorts of wildlife. I almost hit a deer today in Wolf Creek, broad daylight. So is there another way that people aren't gonna point a finger and say, these people are just, being tricky about this? I mean, is a bed and breakfast or something else legitimate for this?
A bed and breakfast is an option. I think it would need to be conducted within the home.
So you can't do it in a adjacent building?
It would need to be within the same structure.
But I thought you could I thought there was something where you could do it.
Recreation lodge.
There you go.
Approved last month, right?
That was in the same building, I thought. No,
I
so during this year at Nordic Valley, somebody approved something in their garage. It was a detached garage, I thought, in Nordic Valley. They fixed up the second floor.
Yes.
And they got it approved as some sort of a simple lodging thing. So, to me, people are gonna see this and they're gonna say, well, anybody in the valley can do this.
Yeah.
It's not true. They're not really running a conference center, and if you look at the definition of a conference center, they're not even meeting that definition.
Just the difference that we're not a jury, like we don't get I agree with you. This is a ploy. I believe this is a ploy, but they wrote something down that's gonna become a code compliance issue. So then we have to just say, we're not a jury to say whether you're gonna do it or not. I think the question's valid.
But when I read this, I read it and the code for a convention center or whatever that is called, they don't meet that. It doesn't
I can make
appear to me.
it that.
Well, it says it's an intended the facility was created for that purpose, and that clearly wasn't.
That is true, it is intended to live in, but
We could like make the case that it was built for education and comedy. That's the hard thing.
because I just stayed up at a lodge house just like this one, a little bit bigger. And all we did is we slept in our room and came back and we had a whole retreat meeting in there. I think the code needs to change. The code allows for this to happen. If we want, I think the code has to change. I agree with you on that. I'm just from a conditional use permit, the code allows it, so I don't know that from
I'm
staff.
just saying if there's a more legitimate way, which I've already seen one, which whatever that was in Nordic Valley, seemed much more legitimate to accomplish the same darn thing as this,
Without trying to do jump.
without being sneaky about it.
I have a comment and a question. First comment is, I think that there's really not a good argument, because there, yeah, like you could, Jeff, Commissioner Burton and I talked about this, that you can make the case that it's a conference center or an education center in a home, and yeah, it's not, probably not what that code, when the code was written, it's not what it was intended for. And so my comment is, I think that, yeah, it's a hole in the code and we need to change it. And so my comment is we should change that. Kind of change this because it was written for conference and education centers, not for Airbnbs that, and so my question is, as the homeowner, what does he have to do different other than say, like, here's a piece of paper that says what you could do to start your conferencing? Because I don't know what else there is. Is there anything else that he would have to meet? I mean, they've determined it can't be bigger than 10, which still fits what he would want. I mean,
Could we put a condition that planning staff has to go during the business license renewal and they kind of have to show how they used it as a conference center on an annual basis? Do you have to be willing that as a condition?
Well, that might be kind of tricky. Typically, if someone is conducting an operation and maybe say there's a complaint, or maybe there's something that we get wind of that indicates there's non-compliance issues, then we can go up and, enforce or even, revoke things. I haven't seen that happen yet in my 8 years here.
I think the challenge here, I guess the question is, from a definition standpoint of where we're at, say this gets approved, goes through, he starts doing, does he have to do anything different than have a piece of paper that says, here's some topics to discuss? I mean, and that to me, you're saying that you're operating an education or conference center. If you even put that out, you can't really say, you're not really doing it, because some of them do, some of them don't. Just like every conference center, some people pay attention, some of them don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that it's a hole in the code, really. But that's more I've thought about it.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, I exploit code all the time. I smiled because I was like, good job.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. To your point, it's not the best fit. Yeah, I agree. But they exploited it to a point where in a CUP, we have to approve it if they can mitigate all impacts, right? You guys are telling us, and I've read everything, mitigating the impact. So can't really just say no because we don't think it's right use. Can we or can't we? Can we do what?
I would say, you look at the definition, conference and education center is defined in a specific way. It has language in the code that tells you what that is. It means a facility designed for the purpose of conducting meetings for consultation, exchange of information, so on and so forth. And then you decide, first of all, does this proposed use meet that definition? If the proposed use doesn't meet the definition, then I think that is a situation where you mentioned we're not the jury. Well, you do actually have an obligation here as the land use authority for this type of use to make some kind of a determination to make sure it actually fits the definition, make sure it actually fits the code. There are a lot of close calls where it might be hard to determine whether or not it fits that, and the state code actually does provide what you need to do in that situation, which again doesn't always answer it for you, but in CLUDMA, it tells you if a land use regulation does not plainly restrict a land use application, the land use authority shall interpret and apply the land use regulation to favor the land use application. So it has kind of a tie goes to the landowner provision here if you're not able to determine that it plainly restricts the use that's being applied for. So yes, there is a factual question there. And I think the most important thing for you to do is look at all the facts that are in front of you, look at the actual definition of conference education center, and you decide, does this meet that or not, or does it plainly restrict that or not? And then in whatever motion you make for or against, if that's the reason for denying it, and you make a motion to deny the use because it doesn't meet that, you put good findings in your motion that explain why you reached that decision. If it does, in the planning commission's opinion, meet the definition, or if it doesn't plainly restrict it and you have to fall back on the state code that says you give the benefit to the landowner, then you get to the conditional use standards evaluation and see, are there standards that can be imposed to mitigate any detrimental impacts of this use? So there's kind of a two-step process. First of all, does it even qualify under that definition? And then you look at the conditional use standards.
Which staff does feel like it qualifies in that definition, is that right?
Yeah.
And would you agree with that? As the,
Well,
I get we have to determine, I'm asking staff, could you guys be right?
I look at the, okay, so.
Because I've had a home-based business for years, and so I conduct meetings, I do everything at my home.
I mean,
that's,
what I looked at, it says a facility designed for the purpose of conducting meetings for all these purposes.
Is a home a facility?
I would say the home would be a facility there. They have included information about things that maybe they've modified or done or made it so that they intend it for that purpose right now. I could see it legitimately fitting that purpose in its current form as they are applying for it, meaning right now they've designed it, so to speak, to accomplish that purpose in terms of how they plan to use it. I could also go the other way and say this was a pre-existing thing that they're just trying to shoehorn in right now by saying they designed it that way. I could honestly see it going either way. And so.
So I guess in there, would you be willing to define those for us? Because I think that's the question we have. That's the only real question we have is
Define what for you?
facility, education, conference, read those as best you can.
I mean, I can.
Because that's all we have.
I can read it. I don't want
My
to.
understanding is not that this is not a conference education center or
Yeah.
facility. In the terms of what I think one should be,
Sure.
but that's nothing. I don't know.
Yeah, I can definitely help with the language of the definition, but I don't feel that this is a situation where I believe it's clear enough one way or another for me to say to you, I believe this or I believe that, as far as whether or not it meets the definition, because I can see arguments both ways here.
but Magnus goes back to the state code, and the state code leads in the applicant's direction.
If you were to ask me, I would say that's probably the case, but at the same time, if you collectively as a commission feel that it's plain, that it doesn't meet the definition, and you put facts in your motion or in your decision that support that, I think that's legitimate in this case, as long as it is supported by fact. And if you find that it does plainly restrict this because it doesn't meet the definition, I think that would be a legitimate decision. It comes down to whether or not there's a plain restriction here because it doesn't meet the definition.
So back to my original question, is there a cleaner way where there'd be less scrutiny or question for these folks to accomplish the same thing? They just want to rent that guest house to people. We know it happens. We approved something in Nordic Valley that seems very similar. In fact, maybe this is even easier or better. What was that approved in Nordic Valley, and could you recommend to these folks, hey, if you want to sidestep the scrutiny, just do it this way and you'll accomplish the exact same thing with less hassle?
There was a conference/education center in a home that was approved last year, I believe, in Evergreen, also in a forestry zone. And so,
But what I'm referring to is a unit over a garage in Nordic Valley.
That was a bed and
done
breakfast.
This year,
Yeah.
was it a bed and breakfast? Okay, so these people would qualify for a bed and breakfast. If that garage, second floor did, this would too, right?
And those are attached.
I think it,
I don't
we can
think
look
it
up
was
the difference, no, they were detached.
Okay.
And again, that was a call that you guys made, you said, well, it's probably okay that they're close enough and that they're detached, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the same building. We could compare the definition of bed and breakfast dwelling to recreation or a conference/education center. I think, let's see, bed and breakfast dwelling says no more than 2 rooms rented out by day, offering overnight lodging to travelers. And then, let me see, conference/education center
No, 3 rooms.
can have 3.
No, they have 3.
Yeah, three.
So the bed
Yeah,
and
so you
breakfast-
can have more rooms in a conference/education.
So wouldn't it work in the bed and breakfast today? Today, under the definition.
Yeah, unless they agree, say, fine, we won't rent one out.
Which, how could we say that? Because they have an extra room, like how do you say you can't do that?
But it also says, conference/education center also adds this whole office facilities, range of business related and or other leisure activities that the bed and breakfast doesn't necessarily say. You can do.
So what does design for relate to, Gordon? Is that the proposed use, or is that the home?
The building, it sounds like a great question for the applicant. Hopefully they're gonna be.
I mean, because you could have. Like this is a conference center, well, it's designed as a doghouse, not a conference center. No, the use is designed, the conference center, they're gonna remodel this thing, it'll be a great conference center.
That's what I'm saying, great question for the applicant, right? How are you designing this to be?
I mean, no, I'm just referring back to the definition.
Right.
Because the facility was designed as a conference center.
Yeah, I think that honestly has some flexibility to it because a remodel or changing things around may, if you decide so, constitute a design for something. Or it might not. I mean, you could, as long as you make factual findings and tie it to that, I could see you deciding either way. I mean, if I had a home somewhere and then 10 years later I remodeled it, I added another building, I added more amenities or something, I would probably want to argue that I had designed that facility for whatever I was intending to do with it and not just as a home. But if you find that it was and still is just a home and that's what it was designed for, you might find that it doesn't meet the definition. I'm being really wishy-washy and squishy here because I don't want to answer the question because that's your job. But
There's so many things that were designed for A and they're being used for B now.
Well, they have a couch, 2 chairs and a bar.
Cause I just have a question, can we just hit real quick the second half? I talked to Rick and Steve just before we walked in, Rick, Steve, on that today, on the second half on Basin, did we find anything different? I talked to you guys both about, I talked to the applicant, I talked to the commissioner, like, do we have anything we want to say in here, or is it all what happened in there?
That actually has been pulled from the agenda.
Oh, I made enough ruckus on.
The basin. Well, what we're gonna do on that is we're gonna go back, because one thing that the county commission asked is that UDOT be involved.
It was in that work session.
I listened to it, yeah. I heard him say UDOT needs to be, and Jim was all bugged at how UDOT was reacting. Mr. Harvey.
Yeah, and so I was gonna bring that up, when we got to that, but that item has been pulled. And so we're gonna take it to the county commission in a work session to address, UDOT and some of the turn lane issues that were discussed. And then we'll see where it goes from there and then
So how-
come back here.
How does a road, an issue on the road have anything to do with giving back development rights that were given up?
Because the commission asked, that be considered as a possible option for the amount of units, like a trade-off.
Commissioner Barber, I would say that they didn't give them up, as I like ran into everything, and I talked to the applicant, I went through every document I could for the entire thing, because me as a developer, it didn't make any sense why you do that, and if he did do it, it's fine, right? But I dove back in and it didn't make any sense, and Steve and I talked today about this, is though you've limited it to 10, that didn't actually exclude them from the 54 in our, and you said on that work session that as soon as you rezone, that doesn't mean you had a loss of
Right.
entitlement.
Yeah, and that's why we're
It
bringing
wasn't
it back,
specified.
yeah, and that's why we're bringing it back to you guys to get that clarity on if those exist or if they do not exist. And it's gonna be a judgment call.
So that was easy, correct.
It's gonna be based on what we can see or what's generally best for the valley.
Well, and the economics, if the road comes into it, and I was told what the numbers were, comes out to $1,925. They're valuing each TDR acre at, which doing that sets a significant precedent, bottom feeding for TDRs like that.
And I disagree.
You know, is a relative
And
piece of information.
But as a planning commission, you can't look at those things.
Well, that, I guess
As far as a dollar.
that begs the question,
Well-
is maybe we should let the CW know that they shouldn't sell it for so cheap.
Well, but again, the
Because
TDR
they
doesn't,
can pay their portion
that was the other.
and then sell them for
Yeah.
5,000.
All they cared about was getting the infrastructure paid off here. This wasn't about $1. Like, oh, we can just trade it and it's a great horse trade. I don't
Well,
think
it'd be like giving a Porsche for.
I get it. I'm not saying it's right.
What you
By the way,
said.
that also leads me to believe that they did not actually know that they had those things. I think it's more of a convenience.
Yeah, I talked to the applicant because I did, and I felt confident. I trusted their response. So I called them.
Seeing the thing for me, the general plan is supposed to be density neutral.
If you can voluntarily reduce,
And encourage some just evaporating.
but you can voluntarily do it, but nowhere in the documents is it voluntarily done.
That's right.
It was an involuntary.
And I reviewed the original development agreement and it's silent.
Well, I went back to the rezone.
Yeah.
I went all the way back to 2021. Silent back.
It's silent. And
So-
it's silent. There's
Silent isn't voluntary.
There's just reason we write things.
I think attorneys say silence is complacence, but I don't know if it's voluntary. You guys lawyers say that, right?
I probably watched that and all chased. I said, hey,
Maybe we should poll.
don't, I saw your man, can do that. So let's, and he said, yeah, let's pull it.
Okay, so I'm glad we dug deeper into that, because I felt,
appreciate you doing it.
why just, as a developer, it didn't make sense to me why you would give up 54 things. And if you did, and I told you, I would have been like, you made your bet, Colin, it's like, but it just never said it. And we drafted the development agreements, therefore, they didn't draft it, we drafted it, right? So in my understanding, Portland, that's on us, because we are the drafting party, and if there's ambiguity there as a drafting party, it should go to the other party, right? In typical cases.
That is sometimes the way it happens.
Sometimes, right? Because there's ambiguity and they're saying, there's nowhere in history that I show I.
All right. Welcome. All right. Go ahead and welcome everybody to the Ogden Valley Planning Commission, December 19th. Join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag, United States of America.
Okay, let the record show that all current planning commissioners are in attendance. We have minutes that have been submitted for August 22nd, September 26th, and October 24th. Not having heard any corrections, do we have any corrections? Minutes are approved as submitted. Planning calendar. Rick, do you want to help us with that one?
Recognizing the forum could potentially be difficult. As I said before, I'll be out of the country the 16th, 4th of February. If I don't know if the 15th is any more difficult than the 16th, if you're going to move the meeting. I'm available the 15th, but not after that. I could do that.
I'll make the 16th or the 15th work.
Is that truly a county holiday?
Oh, yeah.
Which that first meeting of the year. Sorry, Marta. Changes to that. So maybe if you're okay, we just move the rules of order and the election of chair and vice chair to the first meeting in February. And then most likely at that time, we'll have 2 other commissioners also appointed, hopefully. Makes sense. You okay with that?
So the majority of that was not caught on Zoom. So just to refresh, did we just cancel the January meeting? Is that what happened?
No. Are you available on the 16th to meet? Moving our meeting in January from the...
I can definitely be available on Zoom. I had planned to be there in person for the original meeting date, but I can see whether or not I can change that up. So either way, I can be there on Zoom for sure. I had planned to be there in person the following week, but I'll see if I can change that meeting time.
Okay.
If you're switching meetings around with Western Weaver, I could be here on the 9th if it matters which meeting you switch with them.
I could check with them. They were very accommodating last year with a lot of things with Ogden Valley, and they were accommodating again. I can see if they'd be willing to do that.
If it's a potential quorum issue, then I.
Okay. Are you available?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me check with them and see. And I do get flack when I go to Western Weaver and I'm asking them about those things. So I will, I'll chat with them. We just don't have one in January. Fine with me. And that's a possibility as well. So, I mean, obviously it doesn't work on the 23rd. Is that why we're trying to do it?
No, I'm out and Jeff's out.
Yeah, we don't have a quorum is our problem. So that's why I'm trying to adjust things. Yeah, I'm good either way. Okay. All right. We'll shoot an email out to you and let you know. All right. So we have, there's a couple items on the published agenda. It sounds like item number 4 has been removed. Is that correct, Rick? That is correct. So we have an administrative item and a public hearing item. We'll go right ahead and move into the item 3, administrative item. Rick, would you please explain the decision?
Yeah, and that was 4.2 that was, no, 4.1, excuse me, that was removed. On 3.1, this is an administrative item, and on this, it's a conditional use permit. You'll be making a decision. On this, you're not required to have a public hearing. If you choose to take public comment, you can, but it's not required. You'll be looking at the conditional use standards, and Mr. Lleverino will be going over those, and you'll make a decision whether or not it meets those conditional use standards. And in the pre-meeting, as Mr. Erickson had indicated, you'll be looking at the definition of that use and if it does or if it does not meet those requirements. So, Mr. Lleverino. Is the applicant here?
Yes, Mr. Jason Cohn is here. Yes, the landowner.
You can stay there, it's fine.
Good evening, commissioners. I prepared a couple of slides together. What we have here is a conditional use permit request. In this case, it's in the Forest 5 zone. You can see this image on the screen here is a beautiful image of the Ogden Valley looking southward from this area. The property that is in question is to the right of this Avon Pass Road. And what the applicant is looking to do is operate a conference/education center. Emphasis on the education. And so what we have here is also an area map, just to kind of give you a little more bearing. You have that area in yellow, which is the critical migration area for wildlife. Then you also have up there off the right-hand side of the road is the shooting range. And continuing northward, you have access to the Forest Service area. So this property lies right on the edge of some of those things. And you can see it's pretty far removed from neighbors, and it's in an area that's considered forest. You can see the area to the south is open grazeland and also some farmland out there. And the operation would include an opportunity for visitors to come and participate in stargazing and be educated on things like astronomy and also observe the wildlife. Some of the things that to consider when looking over a conditional use permit application, standards related to person and property, standards related to infrastructure, amenities and services, standards related to the environment, standards related to the current qualities and characteristics of the surrounding area, and compliance with the intent of the general plan. The standards related to performance, standards generally, and voluntary contributions that would be satisfactory in making this proposal compliant with the general plan, or maybe areas that you find need mitigation. There's also design review, and that really comes into what the site looks like, and what, in this case, traffic, safety and congestion, outdoor advertising, landscaping, building and site layout, utility easements, drainage, and other engineering questions, prior development concept plan approval associated with any rezone agreement. And moving on to staff's recommendation. Staff recommends approval of this request with those conditions stated. And we, after taking time to review this proposal and looking at the zone code and the definition associated with this use, staff felt like it was a good a good fit with the area, and that's why our recommendation is for approval. Again, Mr. Jason Cohn is with us in the office, in the audience, and any questions for staff or the owner, we'd be happy to answer.
I have a question for the applicant. Would you please come forward? It's Jason.
Yes, sir.
How have you designed this property as a conference center or education center?
So I kind of chuckle as through the application process when I see it called that. It sounds like a big thing. This is my home where I live, and we have a second house on the property that we have kind of fixed up and remodeled, and got a kitchen in there and just set it up so that it's big enough for small families or couples to come stay there, to come do this sort of thing. It doesn't look like a school or anything. It's a house. And yeah, the idea is that they come. I've always, I don't know how in the detail I'm gonna go. I've always been kind of a hobby astronomer, and I've always been fascinated ever since I learned that the Big Dipper points to the North Star if you look at it correctly. And as a kid, I've always, that's one of the reasons why we found this property. I don't know, he didn't mention it, but you probably already know there's a dark sky zone up there with North Fork Park and stuff like that. And so the stargazing at my place is phenomenal. I was out there at 3 a.m, set my alarm at 3 a.m. the other night to go watch the meteor shower. And so it's just kind of the idea. On the application, it calls it the conference center and education center. The idea is that people can come stay there, and I'm setting it up. I built a canopy where we can set a nice telescope. The idea is that I share with these people the cool apps that you can point at the sky and they'll tell you what constellations you're looking at, and pamphlets. We have the Huntsville Observatory down at the little boutique hotel there that I see potential with working with and letting people go enjoy that as well. But it seemed like such a great spot for people to come and do that. And we have friends and family come stay with us all the time because we have that guest house, and everybody that comes loves it and can't wait to come back. And so I thought, what can we do with this to, make it more accessible to people that aren't my in-laws or whatever,
So just to be clear, so when you designed it with the intent of bringing people out to stay there, not just to stay, but to also experience what you love. Is that?
Yeah,
just help us the figure in your mind when you remodeled it. Like
when we remodeled it, we've been remodeling it for 3 years. No, I didn't say let's paint the kitchen nicer so that we can do stargazing retreats out here. This is a newer idea. This is an idea I had this year, this last 2023 that I think my original application was in late spring or midsummer or something like that. So it's kind of been since then.
So how would you say, so you're designing the experience?
We're designing the experience. There's nothing about the building itself except for literature that we put on the coffee table and posters and books and electronic interaction with the guests before they come, that it doesn't look like a stargazer place. It's more the geographical location of it. And like if you can see when you see in the pictures, we're on 5.5 acres, huge field in non-winter months. There's a perfect sloping field that people can lay on and just stare up. Like I said, we built a canopy or kind of a wooden covered place that people can go out and point it north the most away from the lights and things like that, just to kind of facilitate that. But yeah, it looks like a house. Was that the canopy you showed me? Sorry, I can't see very far.
So this exhibit C, have that?
It's a little far.
Yeah.
He's probably talking about the other C. Yeah, that C with the elk antlers. Yeah.
Looks like a little deck with a roof on it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And when was that
constructed?
We just did it this summer.
Okay, and
It's still missing a little bit of a roof, but it's at least sealed to survive the winter.
and what was the purpose for designing and constructing this?
That was part of this idea. That is something we did recently to allow people to be able to go outside and maybe have some sort of protection, but still have full access to the idea is it's a telescope stand.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's helpful.
I'm sorry, and the telescope stand is going underneath the roof?
This is, yeah, good question. We're out there, you can go anywhere, and the telescope isn't intended to be stationary. You can take it wherever you like. This is kind of something that directs you, kind of points you north, and which when I go out and look at it, that's the best place to look away from any light that might be coming over the mountains from Ogden City or something like that. So it was just one element to kind of help direct people of one thing they could do while they're out there.
And you designed it with a roof for stargazing?
Okay. Well, any other questions? Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Any discussion?
As I said before, and Felix, maybe you can explain this. There are other options for achieving this that are more straightforward when you have basically just guest house or a second home on your property that you want to give people access to compensation. Could you explain what those are briefly?
Yeah, I mean, in the Forest 5 zone code, there are we do have a list of uses that are permitted and conditional uses. So there are a wide range of different things that they could do. I think this is a good fit. This specific use is a good fit for the owner's intentions, and so I think this is a good fit.
So would one of those be like a bed and breakfast?
Well, the bed and breakfast, I was just looking at.
Is that a guest house, or what is that called that we did in Nordic Valley?
Yeah, so that one is in the Nordic Valley, and that one is a different zone. That's the Forest Valley 3. Mm-hmm. And so that one has different uses. I was looking at the F5 zone code. It's the bed and breakfast is not an option in Forest 5.
I did notice on the zone, so this is listed on the first page of the application there. The bottom talks about zoning, F5 zone. Front page, item number 4, provide areas for private and public recreation and recreation resorts. So, I mean, that's one of the main purposes of the zone. I didn't notice that before. But
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also see the leisure activities in the definition, right? It doesn't just have to be business. It can be educational leisure, right? So the purpose of going out, and what we're trying to do is make sure that the definition actually matches with your use, right? That we aren't just trying to find a way to do some type of nightly rental, that we want to make sure that the operation is going to meet it. Otherwise, it's going to be harder for you later and us, right? And so we want to make sure it fits the valley. That's why we're deliberating so much.
So I'm happy to make a motion. I move that we approve the conditional use permit on file number CUP 2023-14 for a education center on parcel 22-003-0024, based upon the following findings set forth in the staff report. And also, we've heard evidence to the effect that part of the structure here, this outdoor patio, was constructed consistent with the idea of this use that's being proposed for the educational center. This is with a finding that the applicant would like to do stargazing, wildlife observation. Also a finding this is a remote area and that it fits within the zoning the purpose is in the zone that allows for this use. Subject to the conditions and staff recommendations with the following change. That item number 1, that the owner shall obtain a Weber County business license. I would change that to obtain and maintain a Weber County business license. That's my motion.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion for approval with the change that it gained and maintained? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion as submitted for approval?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Is that for or against?
That's against.
Okay, we have, the motion carries 3 in the affirmative and 2 in the opposed. Okay, all right, we'll move right along to item number 4.2, public hearing and discussion and possible action on portions section 106 of the Weber County Land Use Code. Rick, would you please explain that?
Yes, this is a legislative item. You will be forwarding recommendation on to the legislative body, the county commission in this situation. And Mr. William Cobabe is going to be presenting.
All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. It's good to be with you guys on a lovely, lovely Tuesday evening. Just this past February, the state legislature passed Senate Bill 174, which requires us to adjust some of the things that we're doing in our review and approval of subdivisions. That is indicated in sections 106-1 of the code, or chapter 106-1, with the subsections as noted. And Commissioner Johnson actually sent a pretty good summary of those things. And there's a summary included in the staff report as well. So hopefully you guys had a chance to look at those over. And then because we're looking at the subdivision ordinance, staff is recommending approval of the section 106-4 provisions regarding financial guarantees for improvements dedicated to the county and installed by the developer at the time of subdivision approval, to make sure that the burden is on the subdivider / property owner and not on the county to take care of those improvements before they are dedicated and accepted by the county. So hopefully that all makes sense. One thing that in our discussion with the Western Weber Planning Commission that they wished to revert back to the original was on page 7 under 106-1-5.3C, where for preliminary plats, this is under preliminary plat approval procedures. The suggested language was with regard to having it be an administrative approval at the staff level rather than involving the planning commission in those approvals for subdivisions. the Western Weaver recommended approval of this, but with this provision and with those changes to that subsection C removed.
Which
So
line are you on?
it's on line 75. It's on page 7.
So they're recommending the red line, or that's what you put
They
in.
just eliminate any changes to that provision at all. So the Planning Commission will remain the approving body for those subdivisions and not the planning director.
So it would be cross out director and leave the rest.
Yeah, the only thing we would change to this whole section, that whole subsection C, is just to allow to add in the word administrative. That's the only suggestion per the Western Weaver Planning Commission. That's the only change we would make. It's line 75 on page 7.
And then on 78, it would not be to add director.
Correct.
Based on this.
Yeah. So the red lines would be removed and everything in blue would be left in except the and final and director. So it would be administrative land use authority designated and the administrative land use authority for preliminary plat approval of a subdivision. Well, just basically the red as you see there, and then it would just revert back to planning commission rather than planning director. That was their recommendation. If you wish to make a similar recommendation, please let us know.
And is that the final is still going to go to the planning director by
Correct.
the Utah State Code, but it allows this body to be over
That preliminary plat, yes.
So explain this, and I tried, and I think I read a lot of slot, and that's why I sent that email. But because I was still confused.
You're good.
The public hearing still has to happen.
Yes.
So
that's what we're doing tonight.
I just mean in theory, even on a preliminary plat, a public hearing still has to happen.
No, not a public hearing. This is an administrative approval, so public input is not sought when it comes to administrative approval things. Just like the conditional use permit we heard earlier. This is a public hearing that we're having tonight because what's in front of you is changing the laws governing subdivisions. So it's a legislative item.
Oh, I'm sorry, but we're talking about when would there be an administrative preliminary plat if it's small?
A preliminary plat is administrative subdivision. It's just who would be approving it, the planning commission or the planning director.
Okay, so those all are administrative, they're not legislative.
Correct.
But then the final plat
would be administrative as well. And that could be done at the planning commission level or it could be done at the director level.
So, but the final plat's different. The final plat has to be done not by a planning commission or a county commission.
That's true.
It has to be done at an administrative level. It doesn't have to be the planning director. It's just that the planning director is who we have designated because we have one on staff.
That's what that's what the new state code is.
Right.
Correct. That's per Senate Bill 174. There's not a lot of discretion.
Are they
given
going to
us in
change
that
the
regard.
Senate bill?
Potentially. That's one of the reasons Charlie and I thought it would be a good idea to put this in as the planning director approval for preliminary plats as well, because we feel like additional legislation is going to come in the next few months or maybe next year to change that from the planning commission level approval to a purely in-house staff level approval for all of these things. So for now, and again, that's just what Western Weaver said too, for now, they haven't addressed it specifically and said that a planning commission may be the approving body for preliminary plats. And so the Western Weaver group said, yeah, let's keep that here at the planning commission. And again, we're fine with that if you guys want to carry on with that as well.
And we can easily come back and make that change if you want to keep it at the planning commission. And then if they do change it at the state level, we can just come back and change it if it goes that way.
Yeah.
Just seems like every year they keep streamlining it a bit more and a bit more.
So I guess why keep it at this level, like at this point, if it could change? Like, is it because of the public input that we need to oversee platting? Like,
So yeah, there's some
public input.
Yeah,
we're asking for our input.
There's some good reason for that. And honestly, I personally and professionally, I like having the planning commission involved, especially at the preliminary plat level, because the more eyes on a particular agenda item or application, the better, I feel like. No one is as smart as all of us are together, and everybody's got a different thing that they're looking at. So having one person, no matter how good they are.
No, I totally agree. I would prefer to keep it at the planning commission if we could, but it's totally up to you.
So is it Charlie that wants to make the change then? 'Cause
It's Charlie and I both kind of thought that since this is the direction that the state legislature is appearing to go with this thing, maybe let's be preemptive and get out in front of it just a little bit so we don't have to come back in a few months and change this again. But like Rick pointed out,
if we think it's a bad idea, we should do it sooner. Is that what you're saying?
no, if we think it doesn't matter what we think, whether we think it's a bad idea or not, the state legislature has said this is what thou shalt do, and we're just complying with that.
And some of the reasons for this is because of time. We have to kind of second guess because there's so much on our plate right now that to get to Western Weber and the Ogden Valley, even a small change like this takes a fair amount of time. And so that's why Charlie and Bill are trying to think ahead of the game, which is good. But at the same time, I'm agreeing with Bill that it is nice to have more eyes on it. But it does require an additional step a little ways down the road, possibly. We just don't know. And I'll get into kind of the administration of things when I get to the director's comments on just kind of the future of some things as well.
Well, I just get worried that, you know, I trust this staff, but you go to different counties and different cities and how this is going to change when you're not at this body anymore and you're at, that goes to your level, and that personality, to your point, that personality can really ebb and flow then the direction of approval.
It's one of the reasons I'm hopeful that it stays at the planning commission level forever, because I think that's a good thing. And I think it's a good role for the planning commission to have that kind of oversight.
Then I guess I understand you feel that way, but then you suggested it. So I think it's just a matter of trying to decide. And I get the reason why. And I'm just trying to, it's like, you showed me a sucker and pulled it away. I'm like,
if you want the sucker, you can still have it.
Yeah.
No, and really, when you talk about timing with this thing, that's what the concern is, that the planning commission in some places only meets once a month. We meet once a month, maybe twice a month occasionally. And some places, you know, they struggle to get a quorum, even though they're supposed to meet once a month. Sometimes it's difficult. We're even struggling in January, for example, to meet. And so if you've had an application in that meets all of the requirements, but then you have to wait for a planning commission meeting, there could be all kinds of reasons. Whereas if it's just one person, their schedule is going to be a lot more flexible and be able to convene meetings more frequently and more regularly than trying to corral 7, 10, 12 people and all of their schedules. So that's kind of the logic behind why they're clawing back some of this authority. And now final plat approval really is just a staff level or administrative level approval. So we're just, again, we're trying to anticipate and think of how we can get out ahead of this thing a little bit better. But again, personally and professionally, I think it's better to have more eyes on the thing.
I read the whole thing. I read this whole thing, and this was actually the only question I had. And I agree to leave it the way Western Weber suggested until if otherwise ever happens. So I would say leave it as is.
Perfect.
In my opinion.
Should we open the public hearing? Do I have a motion?
Yeah, I've got to just briefly.
Yes.
Take me from here to there.
Yes.
Okay. Today, an application comes in.
Yes.
You meet with the staff. You get a feel for things. Then you prepare a preliminary plat, get your ducks in a row. You come to the planning commission, get input. Then you come back, bring a final plat to the planning commission. And then that goes on with a positive recommendation to the county commission. That's where we are today,
That's
right?
the current, yes.
And the advantage.
Yeah, preliminary and final.
No, goes to the
That's the
planning-
proposed.
the
He's
county
talking about
commission.
current condition.
I guess depending on size. It's a small development.
That's true, yes.
Anything above 3?
9 lots or fewer.
So small subdivision just goes to the director, never comes to planning commission.
Correct.
Okay. Now we're in the brave new world. Okay. and we're doing this to expedite things and make them go faster, right? So we're saying to the developer, okay, you gotta have all your ducks in a row before you even talk to us.
Right.
Everything's gotta be perfect. You gotta pay for all those expenses of getting everything just ready to go. And now you come somewhere here or the planning director, the land use authority, and say, here's all my stuff, the ducks in a row. And you get to go back and forth 4 times on this to get it right. And then you go say, okay, it's final. And the land use authority can say, you forgot this duck, therefore denied. And now you can come back in 2 years. Is that what the deal is?
I think the 2-year requirement is for zoning.
Yes.
For subdivisions, you can come back.
Okay, so denied because we got to start the clock going again.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And you got to repay all the fees again.
Possibly. Most likely, it would just be tabled until they address those items, and then they'd come back. They can address them in a couple weeks or.
Okay, but we got a clock running, right? The state's started this clock.
Yeah.
And you're a bad guy if you don't.
Correct.
Okay.
It's so when they first passed LUMA back in 2005-6 timeframe, there was actually an initial provision that didn't make it into the final bill that said that if you don't follow all of the provisions in the code, that you were guilty of a Class B misdemeanor and you could be fined or potentially even jailed. So that was thankfully taken out. But that's the kind of mentality that a lot of times that comes across in some of these legislative items, is that it's almost adversarial. Like, and up until a couple of weeks ago, I didn't know that developers were having this bad of experience, because everywhere I went, my own personal thought is, what can we do to help accommodate within the bounds of the code your legal rights and
it's not that way. Yeah, it's not that way.
And that's what I hear so much. But everywhere I've been, because my personal attitude is, what can I do to help? I get the frustration. I really do. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be adversarial. And if we can get through, and that's one of the things I like about these provisions, is that we're front loading the requirements back onto the developer to say, bring us a complete application. No more is the county going to continue to be the quality control for a developer's applications. We're happy to, we met with a developer just earlier today, just a couple hours ago, that has some concerns and some questions about what's possible and what can we do with the property. And we're happy to have those conversations. Charlie, Steve, and I, we're all in the same room. We're all talking about, this sounds good, and the planning commission may go for this, they may not, let's talk about it. Those are conversations I love to have, because the developer has a specific list of concerns. They have rights, they have whatever. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what the code allows and what the general plan anticipates, and how can we make these things gel for you in a way that makes sense and maybe even makes you a little money. That's what we're about.
Okay, so now we know where we are today.
Yeah.
And where we're proposed to go is what I just described. The question that the Western Weaver brought up is that, no, we want planning commission to see it, originally give input before it goes for final to the planning director. And it has to be the planning director or somebody other than the county commission for final approval.
So there's a step in between there. And what's going to happen now between those two steps is that, and it kind of already happens already, but it's missing from this dialogue, is that between preliminary plat, so at preliminary plat, the applicant will also bring in all of the construction documents for infrastructure and other required goodness that the developer is going to bring to the table and dedicate to the county or the park district or whoever. And the county is concerned about those improvements. We're concerned about how the roads get put in, the water and sewer, and all of those things, to make sure that when people do move in, they have appropriate access to all of those things. So the developer is either required to put those things in the ground per the construction documents, or bond for the full amount or whatever's left over. So if they are in the process of building out and they haven't put in the asphalt, for example, they can bond for the asphalt. Like this time of year, no one's doing asphalt. They can bond for it. And then in the spring, they put it in and then we release that bond. That will take place before the final plat is applied for and approved, before they can start selling houses. Either the bond, and again, this is part of that section 106-4 discussion, or the actual improvements are put in the ground before we get to the final plat.
Some of that changes, like that was done some of these where you now have a 10% construction contingency and a warranty guarantee, right? And then the warranty guarantee is on top of and inclusive of contingency. And
right. The contingency is a little bit interesting because most development that takes place has a 10% contingency plan. And that's to absorb cost changes and things as the construction process continues on. However, the problem that we've seen in the county is that some of these developments are very large and they're done in phases. So you develop out a certain phase, and by the time you get to the 5th phase, you're 10 years or 15 years down the road, literally and figuratively, and you've got a contingency that doesn't really help cover the costs that are there. So we're wanting to make sure, again, that the burden is placed back on the applicant after a certain period of time. I think it was 2 years, to come back and reevaluate the contingency to say, we're going to push that up a little bit. And in the weird event that it goes down, we can actually even adjust it down based on current market conditions and anticipated costs. So again, the idea is to not place the burden on existing taxpayers, but to shift that onto the developer. And excuse me, presumably the contingency would coincide with the increase in the value of the development itself. So the developer is still getting their piece of the pie anyway. It just, again, is shifting that burden from the county to make up the difference back onto the developer.
So does this mean the developer's got to put the roads in before he gets his plat approval?
That's always been my preference. There is a provision in state code that says that you can do a bond for outstanding improvements. And in the case, like we just talked about, if they have to do improvements like street trees or asphalt that you wouldn't do this time of year, you can bond for those, start selling lots, and then when spring comes around and the temperature is 50 degrees and rising, you can start laying asphalt and putting trees in the ground.
so every development I've done, it's always better to bond because then you can actually collect, you can sell it because it has an APN to it, parcel number. So you always want to bond because then you can actually collect revenue in the state of Utah. A lot of states you can't do that. Where there are some states you can't, but in Utah we can. So
I don't love that because
I do.
Well, the developers love it because they can start selling and start seeing some ROI and start paying for some of these improvements as they come online. And that's totally cool. I get that. But I don't love it because if you buy a house from the developer and you get a building permit because it's a legal lot, you start putting it in, and then the developer says, you know what, we're just not going to put in street trees, which has happened. Then the county is the bad guy for saying, we can't give you certificate of occupancy for your home, which has already been complete and it's already done and it's pretty and ready to go, but we can't give it to you because the developer still hasn't done the asphalt, or they haven't put in street trees, or they haven't done whatever, and we're the bad guy. So that's why I don't love that. But
so then they bond for today.
Exactly, and that's why we've changed those provisions in 106-4.
Well, there ought to be a way to increase the bond over time.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping to do.
And then you guys increased the letter of credit from 4 to 5 million. What was the?
That's just an adjustment for inflation.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's easy, right?
I mean, I can.
I mean, government uses, yeah, just double it. What the heck?
Yeah.
Thing prices have gone 25-30%.
Yeah.
In the public hearing.
Make that motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, I was muted. Aye.
If anybody has any comments, please come forth. like. You want to unmute her? Dan, if you can hear us, go right ahead and just got to unmute yourself.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just a question. Are you looking for comments for items not related on the agenda or what you just talked about this amendment?
At this point, we're looking for public comments or for the item in front of us, which is the changes to the county code to reflect the state code changes.
Okay, no. I would just have general comments at the very end for
Okay.
items not on the agenda. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion if there's not any other discussion.
I've got a question.
Okay.
And that's on 10641, general requirements. Originally, this the third line of the red lined out, subparagraph D,
What line are you at?
line 9. It's on page 10, line 9.
Yep.
Okay. It originally said this shall not apply to street trees and other required landscaping, asphalt, chip seal, landscaping, street monuments, curb gutter, sidewalks, so long as a sufficient financial guarantee exists. But then the blue line, and this would be, I think, what do we have? Line 18, 17. This shall not apply to the required, and you took out asphalt, so it applies to asphalt and landscaping and curb gutter. And I'm wondering if you could explain why, if you've got the financial guarantee that these things will be put in, why do they have to be put in before? Specifically, asphalt, landscaping, and curb and gutter.
The problem is that we've had significant non-compliance with those specific things. So we want to make sure that those things are taken care of or addressed before anything, any land use permit is granted. So.
But basically, we're calling this out and saying otherwise, section 106.43 applies.
Correct.
For those.
Yep.
But you're specifically calling these out to try and narrow them down because from the developer side, it's also like, okay, there's 4 feet of snow out there.
Right.
You want me to put trees in?
Of course
that
not.
seems
Yeah, absolutely.
unreasonable. And so we're saying then 106.4-3 applies, but you're calling it out, those items specifically, just because, but you could bond for any item.
Right.
You're just specifically calling these out. Is that your question?
Well, yeah, we've got street trees as an exception, but landscaping is not an exception.
They're not accepted. They're just saying as long as a sufficient financial guarantee.
Well,
So they're saying you don't have to put those in.
Yeah, landscaping got removed per state code, actually. That's one of those things that state code changed this last year. We can't require landscaping except for street trees are not considered landscaping as such. Landscaping would apply to anything not a tree, basically. So.
Yeah, we can only require anything that's in the public right of way. Anything out of the public right of way, we cannot require any type of financial guarantee for landscaping.
We used to be able to require a bond for landscaping on like turf on people's front yards and things like that. We can't do that anymore.
Okay, so if we got a subdivision approved now, you couldn't issue any permits because the trees aren't in.
Correct.
No, they can do that, but
Or with the bond.
But they
Yeah,
have
they'd
to
have to
have a
bond
bond.
for it.
they can
Oh,
issue the
but
permit.
landscaping, well, wait a minute.
Landscaping goes away. You don't bond for landscaping, it's not required.
It says in here that other required landscaping, as long as there's a financial guarantee.
Right, so if there was a detention pond, for example, that was dedicated to the county and as part of a drainage thing, or, you know, some other property that was going to be developed and dedicated, and there was landscaping associated with that, we could require for those
Like
things.
hillside retention, if you needed to put geomat up and
Exactly.
overseed it or something to that effect.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
Okay, so you have to have the asphalt in, the landscaping in, curb gutter, and sidewalk in
Mhm.
before you can issue a permit.
That's right.
No,
Unless bonded.
no, because you can bond. That's where it says, as long as
Well-
sufficient financial guarantee. And they actually took asphalt out in this.
Mhm.
It comes out as an exception. It is removed as an exception, therefore it has to be in, doesn't it?
It says shall not apply to the required, not asphalt, chip and seal, street monuments, street trees, and other required landscaping, as long as a sufficient financial guarantee of improvements exists or is provided as required
So,
by 106.
yeah, when it comes to chip and seal, that's the very last thing that they do over the top of the asphalt to seal it off. And so the idea is that, I guess, that if you put in asphalt and then would be the last thing you do before the warranty period begins, is put in the chip seal. So
I can see the confusion though, because line 15 says all required subdivision improvements shall be installed and pass inspection pursuant to section 106-4-3 prior to issuance of any land use permit in the subdivision. Fine. However, this shall not apply to the required asphalt, chip and seal, and I understand you can cross out asphalt and leave it in chip and seal, but you can explain that. This shall not apply to landscaping, street monuments, or curb and gutter street trees or other required landscaping, as long as a sufficient financial guarantee of improvement exists or is.
Yeah, that is kind of weird.
Yeah, it's kind of a
Yeah,
double, triple negative here.
Yeah, the asphalt needs to be in place in order for them to get occupancy. To be able to, that has to be in place. They can't bond for that. The other
It's
stuff,
not like the past it was that way, wasn't it? That you could bond for asphalt?
You can bond,
they
you
can-
can't get a C of O
you
because
can't-
fire trucks
correct.
can't get it.
and we're not
You-
going to
you
give you
have
we're
to-
not going to give you a land use permit until the asphalt's on.
yeah, you have to be able to get to that.
I think I understand this. You're saying you'll give a C of O on these things, but as long as there's
if
a
you're
bond.
bonded.
So, okay, you'll give a C of O. We're talking two different things. I'm thinking of recording of a final plat.
Which
and
you
we're
still
talking-
can get.
You can with a bond.
Yeah.
Correct.
What we're talking about is a certificate of occupancy for the structure. You can do if you have it chipped and sealed. If the street monuments aren't in, street trees or other required landscaping. If
Right.
those aren't in,
Yes.
but as long as there's a bond for that, you can get a certificate of occupancy in the house. We're not talking about
That's
recording an AP parcel or a plat, a subdivision plat. We're talking about certificate. Okay,
That
that's
and-
where I was.
That and building permits.
Yeah.
Okay, so you couldn't even take a building permit with that.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
You bet.
Confusing.
Clear as mud.
And I
right?
read this stuff all the time. You're an attorney.
Clear as mud.
Okay,
Thanks. That's helpful for us even to parse it through like that. So thank you.
so that's kind of a planning, as in contractor planning, you better have his asphalt in or everything grinds to a halt.
Which
even
is
though it's
normal. I
bonded.
mean, we are used to the fact of like they won't give you a building permit because the fire truck can't get there, and if your fire hydrants aren't charged and you don't have asphalt in, fire then gets nervous because they can't get up there. That is somewhat normal. It's just how it reads. Is
But the permits we're talking about is the land use permit.
no, because you can. Is that a land use permit? That's called a land use. Okay, never. Okay, I just always call them vertical permits. Is that what they're called? Okay.
Okay.
Do I have a motion?
I'll motion that to recommend approval of file ZTA 2023-11 and ZTA 2023-12 based on staff recommendations with the same change that was approved by Western Weaver. And I know I say that, and I heard the conversation back and forth, but if someday the county has to change that, they already have to change it for Western Weaver, so it's not that big a deal to change it. In this respect, since Western Weaver's already gone in that direction. And I think it makes sense to leave it as is with some planning commission involvement at the juncture that it's at.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Do we need to talk anything about the findings, Portland? Adding findings, just a friendly. Is that needed in that motion?
Depends on if you want them or not.
For fine, I mean, I said per the staff.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I missed it.
I said per the staff report.
I wonder if we ought to be more specific with the West Weaver thing.
I wanted to leave it the same just to make it easier for counties, so they have essentially one set of documents, and if a change has to be made, they have looking off of the same thing rather than go in two different directions when wasn't a lot of detail to start with.
Are you just saying you want more specificity of like the lines that are in there?
Yeah,
He's saying the
I
same
agree
thing.
with you totally, just to make sure that we're approving, we know what we're approving. We're talking about line 15 or 17 or something somewhere, right?
75.
I can clarify that. Western Weaver was that they wanted to eliminate on line 78 director and eliminate all the red lines. It would read, so as Commissioner Barber, the recommend for approval was the administrative land use. This is how item C on line 75 would read. The administrative land use authority designated the administrative land use authority for preliminary and final plat.
Not final.
So we got to cross out that. The administrative land use authority for preliminary plan plat approval of a subdivision other than a small subdivision as defined in section 101.220 of this land use code is the applicable planning area planning commission. That is what Commissioner Barber just. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good.
So we retain, we're not messing around with small subdivisions. We're leaving that language in there. Okay, great.
All in favor of the motion as proposed?
Aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. All right. Moving along. Looks like we're ready for public comment for items not on the agenda. Jan, go right ahead. Jan Fulmer.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have one quick question first, please, before my comment. What happened to the legislative item on CW Basin and acknowledging transferable development rights?
Yeah, I can answer that quickly. That was pulled from the agenda. Was it the applicant that pulled that?
Correct.
Okay, was there amended agenda set out?
No, that happened today.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. I'm sane, at least, all right? I'm not going crazy. I just have one comment, and that is a sincere thank you to all of you on the Ogden Valley Planning Commission. I've watched the planning commissions in Ogden Valley over the years. I've been at so many of their meetings. I've never seen a group of commissioners so focused on really looking into the issues and what is being requested and doing your best to make sure you come up with the best recommendation. What is very, very sad is how much work you put into this and you only can make recommendations. You cannot make a final decision. But thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment for items not on the agenda? All right, we'll move right to, oh yeah, go right ahead. Come on up. Please state your name and where you're from.
I'm Phil Eimers. My address is 2412 Highway 158 in Eden. And I'm here because I was with the group last week, but didn't have time or the opportunity to put in my 2 bits worth. And I understand that the Planning Commission is not the forum to do it, but I just wanted to make sure that I got my 2 bits in. My wife and I moved our family to Eden 30 years ago to raise our children in the atmosphere provided by the Ogden Valley. We both felt that the stress and expense of the daily commute was a fair trade for the solace that we would have during our retirement, because we still worked in Salt Lake, but we made that 100-mile round trip every day, looking forward to retirement in Eden. Suffice it to say, between the unannounced ripping up of our access to Highway 158, the missed doctor's appointments, the undelivered insulin, the general inconvenience of the infrastructure installation, I feel that we have yet to realize the true cost of the new Eden development. And I realize that it's not the Planning Commission that has done this, but it's the county commissioners and that laughable kabuki theater that we attended last week, where that disgusting bit of theater that was put on, where the decision was already made long before the meeting was put on. And that was really a disgusting display, where they really drew all of the people in here to come down and pour out their feelings, and pretended to be listening. And then when they came forth with their unanimous vote and decision, it was perfectly clear that what the majority of people here had to say went right over their heads. And I, for one, was one of the people here wearing a red shirt. And thank you for the time. And again, like the person that just spoke before me, appreciate very much what the Planning Commission has done, and the fact that the Planning Commission has for years tried to follow what the original plan has been for the improvement of the Ogden Valley. And it's not you folks, but it's the elected officials. And I, for one, will do what I can do to correct that the next time there's an election. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, any remarks from planning commissioners?
Yeah, I have a few remarks. I guess my remarks are kind of based on having sat here for a year. Kind of taking it all in. I certainly started out with some observations, and those observations generally been reinforced. It all comes down to the general plan. I've heard that so many times since I've been on this commission, and then with the elected commission as well. Personally, I feel strongly that that general plan is in jeopardy of becoming or being a failure, near term and long term. I think it gets kicked around in some kind of obviously inappropriate ways where it's twisted to whatever is going on at the moment to favor whatever as the gentleman just said, the predetermined objectives are on that particular given day. Early on, I suggested that the plan, because it's old, be updated. I didn't say revised or changed. I said updated, and I was told that the numbers would be updated at least. Well, I don't think that's happened. There are missing parts of that plan that the county's paid money for with respect to sewer and water consultants. I don't know why they would pay the money but not then bring those into the equation. And now infrastructure's been laid down in the ground and federal money has been thrown out there, but the general plan has not been updated to reflect any of that, or there's no plan to do it that I'm aware of, which equates to a lack of leadership. And once again, that the terms in the general plan about creating or moving density to where there's sewer, well, that's not going to happen now unless there's leadership to capitalize on what's going on. And that's just not happening by my observation. And if it is behind closed doors or in secret, away from me or the public, great, but I'd like to know about it. Specifically, you know, it has been frustrating at times here. Two of the commission members recently left the commission because they're frustrated. I'm probably as frustrated as they are, but I decided not to leave because I think it's worth some continued effort. But what's really frustrating, and I really want to have this on the record, is when this commission deliberates over multiple sessions about building heights in flat land and comes to the conclusion, and that conclusion is supported at the time by the county commission, that 50 feet's too tall, 40 feet is more appropriate. And then all of a sudden, boom, it changes on a whim. That's tough. That is really difficult. And that's going to be difficult for the community to accept into the future. And it flies in the face of the general plan in so many ways. So I guess in my summary for being on this commission for a year, it's certainly not opened my eyes, and I think my eyes were a bit open in the beginning. You can't have them fully open until you're here. And I hope the rest of my tenure things can move in a better direction, because I don't feel this has been a great year for the Ogden Valley General Plan. Comments? Okay. Looks like Rick, you're up.
Thank you, Chair and Commission. Just a few things. Just wanted you to be aware. I think I mentioned in the pre-meeting, but Steve is one of our principal planners, and he's moving to Ogden City. We wish him the best in his future endeavors. He's going to the county commission office, and he's going to be their policy analyst. So we're city council. Thank you. I'm stuck in the county, but we're excited for him and wish him the best. Also, as you're aware, two of our planning commissioners have resigned, Commissioner Montgomery and Commissioner Torman, and we wish them the best, and we appreciate their service. And we're going to be posting that information in the Standard Examiner and getting that information out there as well. And then I got to get my glasses on for some of the other things. We chatted a little bit about in the pre-meeting about the rezone and development agreement, and I'm not sure, Charlie, are you on there? He's not. What we'll do, if you're okay, we'll have him, he'll be at our next meeting, and so we'll talk more about the development agreement and the specificities of what was approved for Eden Crossing.
Who wrote that?
Charlie.
Interesting.
Yeah, and well, Charlie and the developer, they worked together, and then we had our legal team review it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because Commissioner Harvey specifically stated he wanted to deal with height. Then we upped it. It's like the developer wanted Charlie with him,
And we went back and forth on that with each one of the individual county commissioners and talked to them about the development agreement. And we can get into details of that because Charlie dealt more specifically with that, and I'd like him to be able to give you the full input. So you're not getting half the story. So, okay.
And I'm sorry, when is that going to happen? I didn't hear the date. At the next meeting? Or?
Yeah, that would happen in our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So Rick, as I read that development agreement, I thought there's some ambiguity here about this transferring it in. Total of 350, but 180 maybe was in addition to the 350. The way it's worded, I was confused about what
Yeah,
talking about.
yeah. Charlie he can talk to more specifics about that. But as far as the transfer from areas on the site, there's I believe 6 units
Existing.
that are on site, and then from the different areas that they are proposing right now, there could be 174 units that could be transferred into that area, with the max of it being that 300 number. But I'd have to go back and look at it.
Yeah, that it was confusing.
If you want me to address that, my understanding is they've already identified 174 units specifically, well, I guess identified from those areas to be transferred in there, which provides the total of 180. But the development agreement has language that says they will be allowed to transfer up to 350 units. Those just are not specifically identified yet as to where they would come from. Anything above and beyond 350 units would have to then be subject to county approval. So I think this agreement, as I recall from reviewing it a couple times over the past week or so, does give them an entitlement to 350 units as long as they're transferred appropriately. Anything above and beyond that would have to be submitted to the county for possible approval.
Does that include some ratio for hotel rooms?
No, hotel and commercial is excluded from that.
I thought in the county hotel had a ratio.
Hotels had a.
We talked about that in relation to
Hotels does not in this agreement.
this agreement or in any situation?
I think in any situation in the form-based area, but I'd have to go back and look.
In CB3 too, right?
I believe so.
CB3,
Yeah.
It's always a 1-for-1 or 1-for-2 in form-based.
I'd have to go back and look at that, Chair. I'm not certain on that, but that's what I believe.
So that would be excluded. So 100 units in the hotel, we're talking, could be 450.
Yeah. And that was similar. They did the same thing that was done with Snow Basin and with Powder Mountain on that.
And this has been signed and agreed to?
Yes.
And that is like hotel, that is common to not have your hotels count towards your density. That
Yeah.
I remember that was Snow Basin for sure.
in the form base, it doesn't in CB3. CB3,
Yeah.
I know in CB3 there isn't max.
Specifically.
Snow Basin did not, I don't believe that counted as density in Snow Basins. But we can go back and look at that for sure. It's just, I'm going off my memory. And
Anyway,
so
I was 8,000 miles away, thank goodness. So I come back and read it cold, and I was confused about these numbers. So you just look at the wording to make sure we don't have a problem in 2 years saying, I wonder what this meant.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't have the development agreement in front of me, and
Yeah.
I prefer to have the author right here to answer your questions. So
Now,
that's-
one just a little aside. When Charlie was explaining form-based, the advantages of form-based zoning to us a couple of years ago, he was saying, yeah, this eliminates the need for development agreements.
that was the intent. That was the intent, and we were hoping that we would not have a development agreement with this, but the commission felt that based upon public comment and things that they received, that they felt a development agreement would be appropriate in this situation. And that's their prerogative, but
Sure.
the intent all along was to not have a development agreement with form-based to make it simpler. But
Thank you.
it's not a perfect world, unfortunately. So, but in the next meeting, we'll have more detail for you on that. So, let's see. January 16th meeting, I'm going to see if we can move that to the 9th. So we've talked about that. Oh, and then Commissioner Barber, you had asked about having a special meeting with the commissioners. Commissioner Frower does not see any issues with the TDR ordinance. He wants to see how that works for at least a year, and then they'll probably come back and look at how that could be revised or should be revised. They'll look at the successes, the failures that have happened, and then look at it at that time. So that's just letting you know that they wanted me to relay that to you. And then with Steve leaving, and also June's going to be retiring the end of January. Staff is not going to be taking on special projects right now. We'll just be able to handle what applications do come in. So as far as ordinance changes and things like that, that will have to be through an actual petition that's submitted. Staff's not going to be able to do those with their staff time at the present time, and then we'll reevaluate that at a later date. So we're kind of doing some internal changes to help try to cut down on some of the funding costs. So,
Can we look at different center code?
I can relay that to the county commissioners and see if they're willing to, have staff look at that.
Okay.
And I think that's all the comments I have.
Nothing tonight. Thank you. All right, we'll adjourn.
Merry Christmas.
Oh yeah, I missed you. Kathy did it.